this video, we will download and install Anaconda. Anaconda is a Python distribution that comes along with the Python interpreter, more than 7,500 Python packages, and some tools that you can use in your day-to-day work life. Okay, so we'll simply type Anaconda, right? Click on this first link. Select this individual edition, which is a open source distribution, and the packages are maintained by the open source community. So we'll click on this product. Yeah, so you see this is the Windows edition of Anaconda. There are, if you're using Mac OS or Linux, there are other installers available. So make sure that you have enough of bandwidth and enough of disk space to download and install this IDE. Okay, so we have downloaded Anaconda. Now we would install it. So click on next. I agree, just for me. Next. Now up to this point we have gone ahead with the default settings, but with this option uh, pop-up box we would select this option. So what this option does is it will set your Anaconda to the Windows path environment variable. Whenever you set any option to the path environment variable, you will be able to launch it from any of the Windows location. So we would make sure that this box is selected and proceed with the installation. Our installation is now complete. So we would untick this. If you're interested, you can check out these options, but this is pretty much the simple stuff, so you can skip it. I'll click on the finish button. The next step is to make a directory in your folder, so that for any future programs they will reside in a single directory. So we'll go ahead and create a new folder. Right, so I would go in this folder and launch command prompt, and I'll type Python. Right, so if you see this message Python 3.8.8, this means that you have successfully installed Anaconda. So we have created this directory Python for programmers where all our programs would reside. Now I would create some subfolders where we can play around with our code. So I would name the first folder as test, right, and inside this I would launch Jupyter notebooks. Now that our test folder is in place, we would launch Jupyter notebook from this particular directory. So I would launch command prompt, and here I would type Jupyter lab. So this would open a session of Jupyter notebook for me. So the folder, one folder gets created here. It would be .ipython checkpoint. So that is going to be hidden and is not shown in our browser over here. Right, when I click on this folder, right, and I think now it would be created. Right, so this gets automatically created. You do not need to worry about this folder. Let it be here. Right, whenever you create a new Jupyter notebook, make sure that the first thing that you do is rename the file. If you don't do this, it becomes troublesome to organize everything at a later point of time. So you can rename it from here, right click rename, or you can do it from here, rename notebook. So I would rename this to playground. Right, here we will just play around with code snippets and try out other things. Let us talk about organizing the files in our project folder. So there will be cases when you have multiple Jupyter notebooks in your directory, and there would be data files as well. So you can club all the data files in a folder called data, and if you have several Jupyter notebooks, what you can do is you can rename them something of this sort, right? So I have this Jupyter notebook, I would rename it to 02 data analysis, and I would rename this playground to, sorry, 01 playground, right? So when you give numbers to these files, you know the order of execution, or in what sequence these files were created. So this becomes a good reference point for you. I follow these conventions for myself, and there is no rule that you should follow on the naming conventions. Whatever suits for you, whatever works best for you, you are free to follow that. Let me give you a walkthrough of the interface of Jupyter Notebooks. So there are several menus in the menu bar. The first one is File. It contains operations for creating a new file, a new Jupyter file, opening an existing one, creating a duplicate, or exporting in other formats such as HTML, LaTeX, Markdown, etc. The Edit menu contains options for cell operations, such as creating a new cell, redoing and undoing a operation, selecting cells, moving cells up, moving cells down, etc. The view menu contains options for showing or collapsing the outputs or the code, right? So let's say I have this Jupyter notebook and I just want to see the code and hide all the output. So I would click on this collapse all output button, right? So the next menu is run. So let's say you have a few cells that you want to execute one after the another, so you can select those cells and select one of the options. In this case it would be run selected cells, uh, and there are several options, like you can execute cells below a particular cell, and you can also run cells above that particular cell. This also gives you the option of running all your cells, right? So this is a pretty handy menu bar. Kernel, sometimes you would run into problems where your Python code isn't working. By Python code I mean the Jupyter notebook. So sometimes restarting your kernel would do the trick. You can also clear the existing outputs if there are any, and you can restart and run your Jupyter notebook up to a selected cells, and you can also run it up with all the cells. So this was all about kernel. So the tab menu, let's say I have 5 to 6 Jupyter notebooks and also some text file open up here, right? So what I can do is, um, these are the actually shortcut keys which would help me navigate, right? I mean, this is not that useful per se, but the Jupyter team has given these options for us to navigate. Settings. So in the settings menu you can configure how the appearance of your Jupyter notebook would look like. So I like the dark theme, so I have set it to Jupyter dark. And if you have some other preference for your Jupyter notebooks appearance, you can configure them throughout all these options. Help. So this help menu, it contains documentation for Jupyter notebooks, or let's say some pandas library, some libraries of Python such as NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib. You can click on any of these and the reference for that particular library would show up here. Now let us look at the tabs on the sidebar. The first one is a file browser. So this gives you an overview of all the files that resides in your current directory. The next one is running terminals and kernels. So let's say you have 3 Jupyter notebooks open and you close one of them, it would still be running under the kernel section. So you can close it from here and it would get terminated. The next one is table of contents. So let's say I have a Jupyter notebook which has approximately 50 cells. So it would become difficult for me to navigate without any table of contents present here. So what I can do is I can have several markdown cells and create cells under this particular markdown section. So let's say I have this particular cell, I would place it just below this one, this particular title. And if I click on the title button, it would take me to this particular cell. Yeah, so that's how table of contents work. Now to know more about this markdown format, simply search markdown cheat sheet and you will be represented with several options which you can play around with. And all this markdown syntax, it works in Jupyter notebooks. So anytime you want to run a markdown cell, make sure that the cell has this particular property set, markdown. The last tab is extensions manager. So there are a lot of extensions which have been made public by the developers, and what you can do is you can go through all this list and play around and see which one boosts your productivity or are very handy to use. So I find this particular Jupyter Lab LSP, which stands for Language Server Protocol, quite useful. So what this does is, it will, when you hover over any function that you have written, any piece of code, then it would give you some description for what that particular uh, code snippet does. Then if there are any errors or warnings in your code, this would highlight it. It also gives you auto completion prompts, which can be a boost to your productivity. So let us try to install this. Install. This needs this package Conda Forge LSP. So I would copy this, click OK. Okay, and I'll go to my project, and I would execute this particular line of code. Do not worry if you don't understand what this particular syntax mean. I'll tell you at a later point of time. So this installation will get completed on its own, and that's all about extension managers. After this extension is installed, you might need to restart your kernel, so you can go to kernel and restart it. Let us now talk about keyboard shortcuts. So whenever you are working with Jupyter notebooks, being productive with the keyboard is going to help you a lot. So let us look at several shortcut keys. So the first one is execution. So let's say you have written some Python code and you now want to execute it. I would now press Control Enter, which would execute it. The second shortcut is Shift Enter. This would execute and take you to the next cell. And similarly, you can run Shift Enter, takes me to the new line. Now, if you want to create a cell above title, you have to press A and a new cell gets created. If I want to change the format, if I want to change the property of this particular cell from code to markdown cell, I would press M, and you see the property has changed over here. Now uh, to make it again a code cell, I would press Y and it becomes a code cell. If I want to enter text in this cell, I would press enter and I would say 5 plus 5. This is a Python code, and I would now press shift enter. To change the property of the cell, you have to press escape. Then you can make it either a code cell or you can make it a markdown cell, right? Be careful that you do not close this command prompt window. If you close this window, the Jupyter notebook in the background would not run at all. That would end your session. If you want to end your existing Jupyter notebook session, you have to click on File and then on Shutdown. Once you do this, the kernel will start shutting down, and you can see in your command prompt window that the session has ended and we are good to go. If you're not able to terminate your existing session through this GUI, what you can do is open this terminal and press Ctrl C. This will kill your kernel and your existing session would shut down. Before you start watching the next video, I have an assignment for you. I have listed some tasks that you should execute before you move on to the next video. The first task is to download and install Anaconda. Make sure you select the checkbox that says add path to environment variable. The second task is to create a project directory which will have all your code snippets when you're following along the playlist. The third task is to launch Jupyter Notebook from the command prompt and execute this particular line. So instead of Saurabh, this would be your name, right? The fourth task is to execute this particular arithmetic expression in a new code cell, and see what the output is. The fifth task is the most interesting one. So when you execute this, the output will be the Zen of Python, the philosophy of writing Python programs. So I won't talk much about it. So just go through the output and try to reflect on it. Try to keep the pointers that this says whenever you are writing a Python program. So that's a wrap for our first video in this playlist. I have tried to explain a lot of things, and it is absolutely okay if you have not understood something at this point. Rewatch the video if needed. Try things on your own. Do a bit of research if you get stuck somewhere. You can post your doubts or ask questions in the comment section. I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. If you have learned something new today, why not give me a thumbs up? Hope to see you in the next video.